Okay, so for this demo, what I'm going to do is start in opening a new file. So basically, I own SketchUp Pro 2023, but I don't use it. They made some changes to something in there. I can talk to you about later. It's the flip over or flip around that I really don't like. So I end up using SketchUp Pro 2022 for most of my stuff, and then if I ever needed to, I always have 2023 because I pay for the subscription. But so anyways, what I do is I have a default file that I find pretty handy. So there's the standard defaults that are available out there, and then I created my own default. So this would be something, I'm not going to go into too much detail on how to do that, but what I can tell you is it's really helpful if you have a particular style that you used to use. So I'm going to click on what I would call my default thing on there. So and so what happens is it opens up this. It opens up an untitled folder or file rather in SketchUp Pro 22. There's always a window that pops up, which is gonna give me a second here. It'll go away, and then once it does, that'll help a lot. Then what I have is I have a white screen. I switched everything over so that everything is white, because when I print, I don't want to print and use up a whole bunch of printer ink. So under styles, I have 3 or 4 styles here that I created. So I have a Mike's Pure White. That's what comes into my default. I have, with no axis, I have a Mike's Pure White with axis. So it shows the green, the red, and the blue axis. And then I have a Mike's Pure White X-ray, so that I can switch over to X-ray real easy. Those are the 3 styles that I created over time. And again, you need to go and see how those get done, but anyhow, at least you know. So basically what would happen on this, I'm going to go jump back over to where we're going to go with this. This is the raised garden bed. And then in there are 4 posts. Each of these posts has some hardware on it. And if I look at it through X-ray, you can see that there are also some other lines that are going to show up later. I'll explain why, but basically those help me a lot with alignment. These here are the hardware, which is that steel, basically a fake tenon that comes out the end, but it also performs as a hardware. So I've got that. And so the dimensions on each of these posts is 3.5, and this is done just to basically be able to use off-the-shelf lumber. But if I go and I dimension that, again, I'll get into dimensioning later, but I'm dimensioning that distance, or that there, and I'm dimensioning that, which shows that they're 3.5 by 3.5. And then if I pick up a dimension on this end, so I'm going not to the top here, because that's actually a separate piece, mainly for beds, not so much for garden beds, but it's showing that that's 14.5. So what I want to do is create a post from scratch that's 3.5 by 3.5 by 14.5. So to do that, I'm going to jump over to our raw screen, and this is the way I would do that. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Now, if I use guidelines all the time, and I use speed keys all the time. So you can go up and pick up the tape measure tool, which is right here. Click on that. I use a speed key to get there, but we'll cover that later. I'm going to put it on the green axis. I'm just setting it on the green axis, and I'm dragging away, and then I'm dragging right back to it. So basically I went 0 distance. But what that did is that guideline is going to help me steer some of these other things that are going to happen here in a minute. Now I'm going to hit T. Right now I'm in the hourglass. You can see the hourglass as the icon. I want to hit the speed key T, which is the same as going up here and hitting tape measure. So I'm just going to hit speed key T. Now when I hit T, it changes to the tape measure. And I'm going to do the same thing on the red axis. I'm putting it on the red axis. I'm clicking, holding it and dragging it out somewhere, but I'm just going to drag it right back to where it came from. And now it doesn't look much difference, but you can see that there's a dotted line here, there's a dotted line here, and those are guidelines. So again, what those are going to do is those are going to help me prevent jumping around of what I'm going to do next. So up here there's an icon, which is, this one shows, these are shapes, And right now it's set as a circle. But if you click on the drop down arrow, there's other four options, four options total: rectangle, rotated rectangle, circle, and polygon. The ones that I use would be rectangle, I use circle, and I use polygon. I don't know that I've ever used rotated rectangle, whatever that is, but I use polygon to draw the heads on hex bolts, which will come up later. I use circles to draw any circle, any hole, any bolt, nut, a tube, anything. That's what I use for that. But right now I'm going to go to rectangle, and I could have hit a speed key for that as well. Now when I draw, by the way, when I hit rectangle and I came out, my cursor changed to, it's saying I'm ready to go. And so it's ready to make a rectangle. What I do is I keep perspective by, if you notice that my green axis is going to the left, my red axis is going kind of to the right diagonally, and my blue axis is going up. That's where I start every single component. And as I get further and further into the drawings, I still begin with a green axis, a red axis, a blue axis. I create the dotted line, and that's where I start. That way, when I click and drag, everything is going off in the same direction. And you'll see how this comes into play later, but I'm going right down to that point right there which says origin, which is where the blue, the green, and the red all meet. I'm clicking, and then I'm dragging out. And I can drag out in any direction that I want. So right now I've got a rectangle, and I've got a rectangle going the other way, and then now I've kind of got a square, but at some point in there it's a square. You can see that it's a square. Now it's a rectangle, but I can't leave go of my cursor right now. So, but if you look in the lower right hand corner of the screen, it says dimensions, and you can see the dimensions are changing constantly as I move this around. Okay, so it doesn't make any difference what those say. I'm not going to try to find exactly 3.5 by 3.5. Instead, I'm just going to click anywhere and let go. So I just let go of the cursor, and what I have is this oddball shape. It's just a rectangle. But if I type in right now 3, and watch the lower right hand corner of the screen where it says dimensions. So I type in 3 space 1 slash 2, which is 3.5, comma, and this is probably the biggest thing about SketchUp that people have to get used to, is in dimensioning of just about everything is always a space, and then the X, the small x, like a 3.5 by 3.5 is 3.5 space X 3.5. But SketchUp, when you're creating a new component and you're making dimensions, you have to put a comma between them. So if you get used to that, again, I haven't let go of anything, but now I'm typing in again 3 space 1 slash 2, which is half. So you can see it says 3 space 1 slash 2 comma 3 space 1 slash 2. Now I hit enter. Now watch what happens when I hit enter. It changes the shape to what I'm asking for, which is now down here 3.5 by 3.5, 3.5 again, comma 3.5, and I'm still in that cursor mode. So I need to get out of that rectangle mode, so I'm going to hit the space bar. So space bar, and space bar always takes me back to the standard black arrow. There's a difference between the black arrow and the white arrow, but it takes me back to the black arrow. Now when it does that, I'm in the same mode as this one right up here. So that's your select on it. So now I'm here. Now I'm going to just click somewhere, anywhere. Click. All right. Now I don't want to be that far away from it if I can help it. So I'm going to go up, take my cursor up here, and I'm just going to click, and I'm going to drag. By doing that, I'm making basically a new area that I want to kind of visualize, and I'm selecting. What I did is I selected. Let's start all over on that. I want to select this because the very first thing I want to do is create a component. Again, there's a lot of different ways that people do SketchUp. Some don't use components hardly at all, I've noticed. Some start off right off the bat with they create groups, which I don't like at all. And so my method, and those of several that I've watched and so on, is to always create a component for basically the lowest common denominator. That is, if we're making a post, the post is a component. If I'm going to make a post and I'm going to attach a cap to it, then the post would be a component, the cap will be a component, and you'll see that later. And then the two of those eventually all combine into a group. But everything I do starts off with a component. So to make this two-dimensional square a component, I have two options. One is I can go up here and click from left to right, and you can see that it changed the edges to blue, and then it changed the center to a kind of like a dotted line. Now I'm in there, and I can, while I'm doing that, I can actually go up to, I don't even know where here it is. Okay, I can go up to the zoom, and it changes the icon or the cursor to zoom, and then I can zoom into that a little closer. So this might help. The other way to do that is a speed key, which is the Z for zoom. Okay, so now I'm in there. I need to hit this. I need to get rid of that zoom cursor, and I want to get back to my black cursor. So I'm going to hit the space bar, or I could go up here and hit that. I could hit that, and you can see now I have the space bar, or I have the black cursor arrow, or I could have hit the space bar and gotten the same thing. So now that I'm in that, again, outsides are blue, because this is so critical. I'm going to spend an extra, a lot of time on it. But I have a blue, 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 blue. Those are the outer rims of a two-dimensional object. But this inside has also got kind of that dotted look to it. So now that that means because it's blue on the outside all the way around and it's dotted in the middle, that means it's currently selected to have something done to it. So I'm in there with my black cursor, right, arrow. Now, while I'm in there, I'm going to right click. When I right click, a window pops up, and these are my options. The one that I'm going to focus on right now, again, some people will go down to this one and they'll make a group out of that. And again, I'm sorry, but I haven't quite figured out why people do that. So there's probably some logic, and I hope I don't cause a big commotion here with all these differences between components and groups and stuff like that. But anyhow, so that said, I make a component. So I go down to make component, and now one of the reasons that I'm going to click on make component. Okay, so when I do that, a window pops up, create component. And then it has what is called definition, which is actually going to end up being the name of that component. And you do not need to use like DOS types of characters and so on. This is kind of cool. You don't have to, like, for instance, you can already see there's a pound sign in there. You can use spaces, you can use slashes, you can use dots. It's really kind of cool that way because it really helps out. Now, I don't use description. I could, and I've never used any of these other things. So it's only naming a component. So the default is component number 1, and that what I'm going to do is I'm going to type. So I'm hitting the shift key, I'm hitting the letter P. So there's a P. I have my shift key held down, O, S, T, and then space bar. Now I could leave it at that, but what I like to do is continue adding letters and numbers and characters to my component name, which will come in later when I do my cut lists and when I do my sequences, because by calling it something right now, I'm going to able to, I'll show you, in fact, I'll just show you in a minute how that works. So I'm going to use dash post, and I'm going to call it 14, which basically is just going to tell me later on that it's a 14-inch. I think it's a 14 or 14.5-inch post. In fact, let's just show you how you can use DOS or characters that wouldn't normally be allowed in file naming and so on. I'm going to show point, which is a dot, 5. So I have a post dash 14.5 space dash. This is just my way of doing it, and I got to tell you, I've been doing it now for a long time and it really works. So space. So I have a post 14.5. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell me, and I'm going to tell anybody else looking at this what the dimensions of that post are. So I'm going to type in 3 space 1/2 for 3.5. I'm going to use the inch mark. So I added that. I'm going to put in a space, a lowercase x, a space, and then I'm going to do it again. 3 space 1/2 quotation mark or inch mark space x, which is by, space, and then this is 14.5, so 14, so 1 4 space 1/2 quotation marks or inch mark. So there's the name of my post. So I'm calling it a post, so that'll tell me something later. I'm kind of also calling it, telling me what the length is going to be, because I'm going to probably change posts later to maybe taller. I definitely am going to change the height when I go into beds. Again, we're going to use the same post, the 3.5 by 3.5 when we do a bed, or even when we do a building like a garden shelter. We're still going to stick with 3.5 by 3.5 posts. So that's going to remain consistent throughout all of these micro framing projects. But the height of that post or the length of that post, that's the part that's going to change. So by calling it a post, 14.5, it's telling me it's a post and it's 14.5 inches, and then this is going to show up later. The other thing that I do is when I name components, I use all uppercase to name the component, and that just comes in handy for me later on when I'm doing some other stuff. It tells me right away that, oh, that's a component, that's not something else, that's not a group, that's nothing else, that's a post. So now I've got all that done. I'm going to go down and click on create. Everything looks and feels the same, except that those dotted lines that we had in the middle, those are all gone. And I still have a 2D object. I still have it selected. You can tell that by the blue, 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 and blue. Now if I hit O for orbit, or again, the speed keys that I use all the time are orbit, Z for zoom, T for tape. Those are just some of the absolute basics. I don't even think about it anymore, but you can go up here to orbit. And there's a big difference between orbit and rotate, and you got to kind of catch that, because orbit is basically, I'm going to go into orbit right now, and I'm going to move. What it's doing is just allowing you to 3D look at this same object from a three-dimensional, from all these different variations. I'm just dragging. Again, you need to use a mouse, by the way. If I haven't mentioned that already, don't ever try to do this with the pad on a computer, or by, even though you can do it with the pad, or you can do it with a touchscreen. Touchscreen is you can move around like this, but the problem is that when you try doing some other things, you're just not going to be able to get by with touchscreen or the mouse pad. You're going to need a mouse. So if you don't already have a mouse, I would strongly encourage you to get a mouse and connect it. Okay, so that's orbit. Now that is different than rotate. Rotate, I'm going to hit the R key, which, oops, excuse me, it's not rotate. Let me think for a second. So now that I think about it, I don't use a speed key for rotate. Instead, I click on the object, then I hit R. Come on, it's not coming through right. Okay, I got it. The problem is that I do these things so unconsciously that I don't even remember what some of the speed keys are. This was Q, and I don't know where they came up with Q, but Q allows you to actually take and move the object to switch it around. All right, so that's Q. That's rotating it in what they would call the green axis. I'm going to Control Z. If you don't already use some of the control keys that are basics to Windows, or I think to Apple, I'm going to use a Control Z to basically do an undo. So it was the same as if I went up and did an edit undo. But so here's the blue Q, and if I, that is rotate. I'm not, if you notice, the axis is still where it is, the red, the green, the blue, but I'm rotating the actual object rather than just going around it. So I'm going to Control Z again, just to make sure I don't have any damage. I'm hitting the space bar sometimes 2 or 3 times to get my black cursor back. Now I'm hitting O for orbit, and you can see the cursor change to that, I think it's like a top, huh? But anyhow, that's orbiting around. I'm not changing the object, I'm just looking at it from different angles, because you can see when I do this, the blue, the red, and the green go along with me. And so there we go. So now what I'm going to do is hit my black, or hit the space bar. I'm I'm going to click somewhere just to make sure I'm where I'm at. I'm going to click on that, and in all that goofing around, what I did, if I click on that, I see that I have the spaces in the middle. So I think I damaged it. So let's just start all over. So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to delete it. I selected it and I deleted it. I still have my dotted line here. I still have my dotted line here. So I'm going to make a brand new rectangle. So I'm going to go up, click on rectangle, come down, and you can see I'm starting at the origin, which is where the red, the green, and the blue meet. I'm going to click. I'm going to drag out here somewhere in any shape, no matter what. I'm going to let go. And then now when you watch, I'm going to type, and these are going to change when I type. I'm going to type 3 1/2, comma, 3 1/2, enter, and it automatically changed it to 3 1/2 by 3 1/2. And again, we can confirm that by using, for instance, the tape measure. If I put the tape at one corner, it shows 3 1/2. If I go this way with it, it says 3 1/2. And the tape measure is different than dimensioning. Dimension is this one here, which basically this is similar, but it leaves a trace. It leaves the dimension. So now I click it there, drag it to that corner, and then I drag it away. It actually leaves the dimension for me instead versus tape, which tells me where I'm at, but it doesn't leave a trace. So if I let go, it'll leave something out there, and it leaves a dotted line, which we're going to use a lot of, but it doesn't leave a dimension like this. So again, I'm going to get rid of this by going Control Z, and now I'm back to, but I have a tape as my cursor. I need to get that back to the black arrow. So I'm going to hit the space bar. I now have a black cursor. And again, now I'm going to select this stuff because it's still not a component. It's just 4 lines and an area in between it. It's a 2-dimensional thing, but I wouldn't be able to do much with it. In fact, if you've already done this, like if you grab any one of those things and you start dragging them around, you've probably experienced this as you start SketchUp, and you'll see that that's pretty, it doesn't get you very far with that. It's great if you wanted to make a polygon or something like that, but otherwise no. So I'm going to hit Control Z to get back to my rectangle. Again, now I have a different cursor, which is the crosshairs or something. So I'm going to hit the space bar. I have my black. Now I'm going to select this, and I have two options. I can select from left to right, or I can go up here somewhere, for instance, and select from right to left. It looks and feels the same, but it's going to come into play later. I won't get into that now, but there's a big difference, huge difference between the two. So for right now, if we just focus on left to right selections, I think it would probably be the best. So my cursor is up here anywhere. I'm going to click and I'm going to drag it. So when I did that, I selected this. It's not going to select the dotted lines or any of this blue stuff because that's basically background stuff. It's only selecting what you drew. And again, if you notice that those little dots are in there, so I'm inside it somewhere. The outside is blue, 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 and blue. I'm going to right click, and this is where I'm going to say make a component. This is where I'm going to do like I did before. I'm going to type in POST, all in uppercase, dash 14.5 space dash. Now I'm going to dimension it, or show the dimensions, 3 1/2 quotations, X, 3 1/2 quotations, space X, and 14 space 1/2 quotes. And there's what I have. I have a post. 14.5 is basically the title of the component, but I'm also sneaking in some dimensions in there which are going to come in later. I'm going to say create. So what I have right now is a 2-dimensional object. It's a component, and if you don't believe me, you can click on it. By clicking on it, you can see that now I have blue lines, and you can go up to, here's the tray that I use. I'll cover that later, but basically there's a tray to the side, and you can either leave these out all the time or you can set them up so they basically auto hide. I like auto hide because then it gives me the whole screen to work with, whereas in the beginning you may not want to auto hide because it can be kind of confusing. I think you change it up in here. I don't do it. I leave it in auto hide all the time. But the various entities, or the whatchamacallits, the views that I keep entity info, I keep materials, I keep scenes, I keep components, and I keep styles. Those are the only 5 that I leave out in my default tray. There's other trays, but those are the ones that I'm going to leave because those are the ones I use on a very, very regular basis. So there's an arrow here that's going to open that up, and you can see that if I have this selected, blue, 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 and I go over here, it's showing me that the definition, or the name, in other words, of that, is showing me that it's a component, that there's one of those in the whole model. There's only one so far, and that it's called a post 14.5 by 3.5 by 3.5, etc. Okay, so that's that part of it. And before I do anything else, I'm just going to give everybody a coffee break, and I'm going to do a save so I can save this file in case I lose something. But then I'm going to stop this video, and then I'll pick this up after that. So the last thing I'm going to do is do a save, and I can cover that. I'm going to go up to File. I do a save as. I have a folder set up in here somewhere, which is woodworking projects. I have beds. This one is under one called MikroGarden. I number them so they're easier to deal with later. Okay, I have a folder inside that folder, I call it MikroGarden SketchUp. And if you can see, I've already done a number of saves, and you can see the date modified today, January 3rd of 2024, 6:55 a.m., blah, blah, blah. It tells me it's a SketchUp 2021, and then it tells me the file size. Those are older versions. So what I'm going to do is click on one of those, the third one, right? Okay, so this was done. This is my method. I have a 3 letters, or four numbers rather, ahead, 250. That's the project. That again helps me quote alphabetically later on. I have a dash. I call it a MikroGarden. I have a dash. Then I use this as my method for keeping things basically in alphabetical order as I'm saving files later. Because you can always dig up files by date modified, but you can also click on this and do files by name. And that, again, this is going to come in handy a little later. But here's my method of doing it. 24, that's the year. So it's 2024. So I just 24 dash 01 is the month. So 0 to January is 01 is January, 02 would be February, 03, etc. And I use the 0 in front of it because otherwise, alphabetically, they would change later on once you get into 10, 11, and 12. Trust me, I think those of you that are with me on this know what I mean alphabetically, that changes things. So I do a 01. The same thing with the date. Today is January 4th, so I put in 04. At some point, that's going to jump up to 10 or to 12 or to 20, 21, 31, whatever. Okay, so it might be a 31. So that's the year, the month, the day, and then within that day, I start numbering them, and I'm basically limiting myself to 99 iterations of this, but that's okay with me. I don't think I've ever hit that in one day anyhow. But 03. So this one, I have, it's already, by clicking on that, not double clicking, but clicking on it, I have it already down here in the file name. And all I'm going to do is change that 3. I'm going to click in there. I'm going to change it to a 4. And then I'm going to delete the old 3 out of there. So I don't even need the SKP because it'll do that automatically. So basically, here's the name of my file, 250-MikroGarden space 24-01-04-04. And again, that's going to now give me a file. I'm going to save it. Everything looks and feels the same, but now I have a file You can't see it, it's above the screen capture, but it's up here, it tells me the file name. So there we go. Again, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push or pull this to basically make it a post.